Okay, brilliant. Hi everyone, my name is Adam and I co-chair the PRCA's Corporate Group. I also run my own little boutique outfit called Do Different, which is focused on public affairs and communications. My opposite number, Rebecca, is sadly unable to join us this afternoon. Nevertheless, I'd just like to say thanks for all her support and her help behind the scenes this week. Today's event is about delivering bad news, and it's going to be recorded for social media, and it'll last about 45 minutes. Before we get into that, I just want to tell you something a little bit about the PRCA and this group in particular. For those who don't know, the PRCA is the world's largest professional PR body. It represents more than 35,000 professionals in 70 countries worldwide. Its mission is to create a more professional, ethical and prosperous industry. And it does that by delivering training, data and networking, among many other things. As part of its networking stream, it runs about 50 or so sector groups, and this is one of those. We launched it back in December last year, and that's when we explored whether businesses should take a stance on the big issues of the day. Since then, we've committed to hosting 4 events in 2021, and this is the first one of the year so far. You can follow us on Twitter at PRCA_corporate to receive updates in between the various events. In brainstorming about the next topic, Rebecca and I felt that 2021, as we finally emerge from the global pandemic that feels like it's been going on forever, and as we adjust to the full impacts of Brexit, things are shaping up in a way that are quite challenging in terms of the economic environment for both large and small businesses alike. You only have to have had the Chancellor's budget last week when he revealed a titanic shift in policy towards a higher tax, bigger borrowing, expanded states, and one that he'll be answering for many years to come, I'm sure. While many of the tough decisions, such as making redundancies, have been postponed because of the extension of the furlough scheme, we believe a lot of the corporate communications professionals that we know will find themselves tasked with articulating and delivering bad news as their organisations have to navigate all these various challenges. So today's session will discuss how to mitigate the negative impacts on your companies and how to salvage reputation when things are going south. We thought this would be a useful exercise for those starting out, for those who've recently switched roles in their careers, but also for the seasoned pros among us who want to pick up new tips and also share their ideas as well. So in order to do this, I thought we'd put together a brilliant panel. So I'll introduce the 3 people now. We've got Aisha Kulveer, who is Head of Communications at One Housing Group, which is a London-based G15 housing association. She was elected as a Bromley councillor in 2018 and is currently the Executive Support Assistant to the leader of the council. She is a board member of My Time Active and a trustee of the Langley Park Multi-Academy Trust. She is a passionate advocate of women in both business and politics and was a co-founder of the Conservative Young Women's Group and is deputy director of the Conservatives in Communications Network. In 2019, Aisha also stood as the Conservative parliamentary candidate for the unwinnable seats of Lewisham West and Penge, and I hope she tries elsewhere next time, mainly for my sake, that I don't have to go there again. Andy Taylor leads the National Public Affairs and Government Relations team at Network Rail, the owner and operator of Britain's railway network. They've been in the news today as its chairman, Sir Peter Hendy, has published his interim union connectivity review about linking all 5 parts of the UK, and you can check out the video on the Prime Minister's Twitter accounts. Before joining Network Rail in 2019, he led public affairs at HS2, AMI and the Association of Train Operating Companies. Prior to that, Andy was political advisor at the Local Government Association and a policy advisor at both Hackney and Brighton and Hove councils. He began his career at the New Statesman and has worked on general election campaigns in the UK and the USA. And Andy is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a member of the CIPR, a rival to the PRCA. And last but not least, we've got Kulveer Ranger, who has one of the largest job titles in the Western world. He is the Global Head of Strategy and Communications for Financial Services and Insurance, and is Senior Vice President of Strategy and Communications at Atos for the UK and Ireland. And breathe. He's been a leading figure in the development and communication of innovative technology-led services and has a unique track record working in politics as well as the public and private sectors over the last 20 years. This includes having worked on the delivery of the London Oyster Card and for 4 years for the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, leading the transport and environment briefs and establishing the Digital London office. Kulveer's time at City Hall also included preparing London for the 2012 Olympics, making the case for Crossrail, and leading on initiatives such as the Cycle Hire Scheme and Tech City. He serves on various boards, and he was also a former chairman of the Conservative Party. He is an international public speaker and a regular broadcaster on both TV and radio. I think he was on Times Radio this morning or yesterday. So
last night, actually, Adam. But I'll just add one correction to your excellent delivery. Not a former chairman, a former vice chairman, because a former chairman would be, wouldn't have mind being chairman at some point, but I haven't been a former chairman.
There were quite a few promotions in that, I think, as well. Thank you all for joining. Appreciate it. I'm going to jump straight in because I know this is 45 minutes. I've got a couple of questions that I would like to ask, but if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat function and I'll get to those as quickly as possible. So if we start with you, Andy, could you talk to us about a time or times when you had to deliver bad news, how you had to do it, what was the result, whether it was good or bad? I'm guessing that given your background in rail, that's involved rail crashes, fare increases, and the sort. Yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. I mean, I think, thinking through this, there are quite a few different types of bits of bad news, I suppose, we sort of deal with. There are the planned things that we can't not put out, like fare rises. There's not going to be anyone kind of supporting there. There are things like big projects that may be, quite disruptive. There are two sides to that story, and I think it's about managing the people who are going to see that as bad news as well as people who see it as good news. I think one of the ones I was going to kind of pull out today really was when it really is absolutely, clearly bad news. And I think, for us last August, we had a big incident in Stonehaven in Scotland. A train derailed from Aberdeen to Glasgow, and there were 3 fatalities, sort of two staff and 1 passenger. Actually it was at a time when Scotland was in a heightened restriction, so there weren't very many people kind of traveling at that time. That was an 8 a.m. weekday train, so in pre-COVID times that would have been a very busy train in a very mountainous area next to a kind of river. It's not a million miles away from sort of Balmoral country, so it's those kind of conditions, and even sort of getting to the scene is incredibly difficult. So when kind of starting on, we obviously have really kind of well-established crisis management plans, but again, situation, COVID, that kind of mountainous region, you've suddenly got a whole extra load of things. You've got 2 governments to deal with who don't necessarily think the same about everything as well. So, our first approach is to take responsibility. That's not the same thing as taking liability. And I think it's really important that as comms and strategy people, sometimes there's another side to some of the legal advice you're getting, being really clear that if we're not there shown to take responsibility for what's happening, making sure the police and everyone can get to the site, that making sure you're doing everything you can to actually start to get into both the recovery, kind of immediately helping people. There are also injured people on there as well, so getting people out, getting chief exec and secretary of state there immediately. Also starting the plans to make sure by the end of the day we were going to be able to have a senior person go and meet the families of the bereaved families as well. And I think absolutely clear, there are always people kind of concerned around you that what does that say, what does that mean, but you really have to make sure that within a day space you are kind of out there doing it. There's an interesting kind of dilemma with the media team as well, actually, and this is an area where sometimes I feel some of the press approach can be a bit from the 90s, waiting for deadlines to come along for tomorrow's papers. It's already on social media, it's already out there. If we haven't told the local MPs first, if we haven't got to the kind of local ministers first, then they will have already kind of tweeted, and they've already kind of got out there. And I think that's probably a change that's kind of really happened in recent years that we need to get ahead of. There's a strange dichotomy between we need to take time to understand exactly what's happened, but we need to be reacting quickly. So it's actually about looking at all the different potential causes. It was about 3 weeks before we knew exactly what had happened. The scene itself was pretty devastated, but we needed to kind of cover off all the different angles. There was a bridge, there was a train, there was some drainage, there was some earthworks, needing to kind of know all of those points and really keeping that information flow going. A lot of people were asking. It went from a national story within 3 days to a regional story kind of thereafter. So you're sort of managing that at different levels, but we also really wanted to make sure we were quickly marking it too, and that's really important, I think, kind of externally. So we had an event at Edinburgh that Nicola Sturgeon was there for. We had one in London, Waterloo. But also it's really important to do internally too. These things are really hard on the staff, and I think even when you can feel a few steps removed from it, public affairs team even phoning up to tell the MP, that's a difficult conversation. That's one people do feel kind of emotional about, and you do have to recognize that. And then sort of finally, I think it's where you say the comms can then have a kind of impact there on business strategy too. So what we were kind of looking at is how do we really kind of address what happened there. So we kicked off 2 reviews, one by Lord Mayor on earthworks, which was more about how we've got earthworks that are up to 180 years old, not built for kind of modern standards, but climate change, and this was caused by a kind of convectional thunderstorm pushing earth onto the tracks. How can we really kind of make sure we're building resilience into the future, and also how can we use better technology to know when those kind of weather events are coming and kind of forecast further in advance? And Dame Julie Slingo used to be at the Met Office, has done some work for us there. That's absolutely not to deflect. That's absolutely not to kind of, try and make what was a very difficult specific incident into a broader subject, but it was actually kind of saying, this is a growing risk. There is a climate change link to it, and we are responding. So, we don't want to be in a situation where these terrible things happen. We do what we normally do, and then it goes back to normal pretty quickly.
Cool, thank you very much. Aisha, what about you? I'm assuming that's in your sector, it's about the cladding scandal and fatalities, and hopefully some less dramatic events than that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously working in housing, there are a number of things that can go wrong, and when you do, it's devastating for people, because that is your home, that is temporary. Even a small thing can be a massive inconvenience for residents. So I think Andy touched on a point which I'd like to pick up on, is really the strategy and knowing your business, and knowing the risks of the business. They're not always necessarily the things that are going to be PR risks, but it's so important as comms professionals that we input, and it's not scaremongering, but it's just being prepared as much as possible. So even if you think, oh, that's probably a pretty low PR risk, it doesn't matter. Create reactive lines, get the business ready. And you can, there's no such thing as being too prepared in comms. And I think you've got the crisis stuff that Andy was talking about, and you've got the ongoing difficult comms, like kind of building safety, cladding, communications, that I think everyone probably on this call knows about. If you haven't heard about it, you've probably been living under a rock for the last year. But basically, it's a for those that aren't so up on the intricacies of it, it is following Grenfell 2022 for the crisis communications kind of freak kind of accident. But it has long-term effects, and so more than kind of in the housing sector, and the difficulty for organizations who own, whether you're in the private or social sector, public sector, if you're a council that owns housing stock or cladding, housing association, or private landlord, you have residents, you have your customers who quite rightly are very upset, very angry that they're living in buildings with cladding, and some of it is dangerous, some of it isn't, and they're kind of stuck. And those are really difficult messages to give to your residents, particularly when they they want more answers, right? Think about if you were in a flat and you couldn't sell it and you couldn't, you can't move. Your whole world changes, right? And you can't make decisions based on, your life changes. So for us, it's for the comm strategy, the sector as well. It's really about being as honest and open and transparent as possible. From a customer's point of view, they want to know that we're on top of it. So there's a public affairs lobbying strategy that we're doing constantly. We're talking to ministers, we're speaking to MPs, we're speaking to influential people within the sector, so the private builders and the Chartered Institute of Surveyors. So all those things we are constantly communicating to our customers to say we are on your side, we're on the front, just to give them some reassurance that we're on their side. And the other kind of key thing for us is just communicating as much as possible. So even if we don't have any updates to give them or anything specific to say, it's just to kind of give them that reassurance you're still working this through, and we are trying to come up with solutions for people. But it is a really difficult, constant ones. But we've noticed that the more that we communicate with people, even if we say no changes, but we're on it, we feel more reassured. Our customers feel more assured by those messages. But I think in kind of the public affairs space, the customer communication space, and the internal communication space, what we need to be doing is always be thinking about how certain messages land, and always be thinking about your tone of voice. Within comms, you have to put you have to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. But that is very, very true. And I think any kind of difficult communications that you're putting in, whether it's internal, external, crisis, if I was in that person's position, what would I think by receiving this piece of communication? So that is kind of the big thing that's going on in the sector right now. But yeah, I think my kind of big piece of advice is to know your business really well, and to always be on our outlook of risks on the horizon and things that are going on right now, and just try to be as prepared as possible.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Kulveer, from your side, you've got an interesting background, obviously, from the political side of things. Can you share any experiences from your time maybe in City Hall?
Yeah, never a dull moment, Adam, I'd say, in my time at City Hall. But look, I think a lot of what Andy and Aisha have said is really relevant. I think, let me give some examples, because let's be honest, from a communications front, when we're brought in, and I know that the title here is delivering bad news, but that's already happened. And what you're trying to do is manage the situation, and manage all the kind of noise around it with all the various stakeholders. And people think that maybe just the public, but it's a 360 degree of stakeholders. And let me give some examples. So maybe three that kind of give a different type of, I'd say, a communications challenge is the traditional sense we used to call it when you've got a difficult situation. The riots in 2011, something that happened, I won't go into the sort of why-fors of it, but the managing of it was difficult because all of us who worked for the mayor were at a wedding in the south of Spain. So that was a starting point, and the mayor was away on holiday as well. But getting onto the scene, and I think, as Andy was saying, when there's a crisis of that kind, owning it, not leaving a void for other people to start making assumptions or filling that void, because it's about leadership at that point. And as quick as you can, you need to establish the facts of a crisis of that kind. That's very imminent, very in people's face, and people are probably in shock, whether it's an accident, as Andy was saying, or something like that, something they didn't expect to happen, and it's kind of jarred their reality. And they want, as Aisha was saying, you need to establish trust, competence, a sense of there's somebody in charge, and leadership, and you have to front up and face it, even if you don't have all the answers. And I think that was one of the things, because I remember being one of the first back into London, and as people might remember, these events started to proliferate around the city, and it felt like something was grabbing hold of the city. Now, in reality, there were one or two pockets of things that were happening, but it felt like it could be happening all over London. And because that was being magnified through many news feeds, the world started to look at London as a place that was rioting. That was not the case. But then the people in London started to feel that as well. So it's self-fulfilling almost, even if the reality is quite different to what people are feeling. However, the leadership is important. So as soon as Boris was back in London, which he got as soon as he could, the key thing for him to do was to front it, to be there. And I remember a very brief discussion we all had about, what do we do? Because there was a sort of epicenter in Tottenham and in one or two other areas. And there was a discussion of, how do you tackle this? And I was very much advocating that even though we don't know the situation, and there was a tragic situation at the heart of it where somebody had been shot, and then that was a part of what kicked things off. You had to go and face it. And that's why Boris went out there. Now, in his own style, he did something which then changed the tone of the event. And this is his unique leadership, where he lifted a broom. I don't know if people can remember that. And it sort of indicated as kind of, okay, this has happened, but we're in control and we're going to clean this place up. And that kind of became a symbol of, okay, actually, we all need something positive about this. And then we started to change the story on and move it on. But it's about that kind of leadership, don't leave a void, fronting up, and then having established leadership, then establish a way of making the situation feel more comfortable for people and taking them on that journey. I think another example of an ongoing communication challenge from the City Hall days was probably the Olympics. Now, a fantastic event. 2012 was brilliant for the city, for the country, for everyone involved. But in the 4 years leading up to it, and as someone who was responsible for transport, and Andy, you might remember some of this, all I heard was it would be a disaster because London could have coped from a transport view on dealing with the Olympics. And people had their own views because London has its transport issues anyway. Now you pile on the Olympics on top of that. How are we going to cope? How are we going to cope in East London? How are we going to have this new Olympic stadium and get everybody out there, get everyone back? And by the way, I sat on the Olympic and Paralympic Transport Board for 4 years, every 2 weeks, going through every minutiae of detail, every 15-minute scenario of how this thing would play out. And I was supremely confident of all the agencies and the people and the skills and the planning being done. But we had to share that with people to make them feel confident. But all they were hearing from the press was it's not going to work, it's going to be a disaster. So we had that constant drip feed of negativity, and we had to present a positive view. Why? And what we did was keep demonstrating the deliverables. And Peter Hendy, who was commissioner at that point, and TfL were doing a great job of delivering new infrastructure, new bridges, increasing the capacity of the DLR, river services, improving the Jubilee line, all the things that would in the end help the Olympics work, but we were doing it early. And that's what helped us build confidence in the run up to the games, and also the things like the dampening effects of having people not come in too much. But it was a fantastic games. And as soon as it happened, people forgot about the transport because they enjoy the games, and that's how it should be. But that's a constant theme, that challenge that's coming at you, and you've got to keep meeting the challenge with some good news. So you've got bad news coming at you. What's your good news? What's your stable of constant good news that you can give? And then on a similar vein, but probably, the worst kind of these challenges are always the tragic challenges. The Mayor, Boris Johnson, was a big advocate of cycling. We did a lot in his time as Mayor to improve cycling on the streets of London, the Cycle High Street scheme, the cycle superhighways, redefined the landscape of the city in doing so. But because he had made it such a political priority, there was a sense in the media that, every death, which is a tragedy, was very much front page news. It was. And it was always a question of, are we doing enough if we're advocating cycling to help save people's lives, which we were trying to. Now, that's a very hard thing to combat because, tragedy, as Andy was demonstrating, there's not much you can say to help people when they're seeing loved ones dying. But what you have to do is keep focusing on where it is we're trying to get to. Now, that's not to disregard what the tragedy is and the acknowledgement of it. That's the thing, front up again, acknowledge the tragedy, but say why we are doing what we're doing to not have those tragedies happen. And I think that was a real battle. It was a battle between the political will of the mayor to improve the city, to make it, as he said, a cyclised city, a safer city, one which is greener, cleaner, people can get on their bike, feel comfortable, against a view that was coming through that the city isn't safe, the roads aren't safe. And that's a constant thing, but a very heated and emotional conversation and a challenge. and one that you have to rise to when you really, really want to make a change. And communication is at the very heart of it. And my final point here is, this is where comms actually isn't just about the message, it's about the solutions. Because what happens from a communications front is you are facing those questions, those challenges, and sometimes you actually have the answers and have to get people to go back and say, you know what, we need to deliver these things because we understand that this is the challenge people want actually resolve. And communications helps actually identify the answers, if not feed into the programs and projects to make them better and make them deliver the right things, that then give us the right answers to give back out to people as well.
That was really, really interesting. Thank you, Kulveer. One thing that I was just thinking about is that you've all got very different backgrounds. No one is, I think, by qualification or anything, a crisis communications expert. He obviously works in media relations, public affairs, government relations, corporate affairs, etc., etc. Yet we're all involved in crisis communications to some extent. For the people on the phone who are just starting out or thinking about changing their careers, what piece of advice would you give them in terms of, should you do like a CIPR qualification, a PRCA something? Is it best that you learn this on the job experience? You know, it's an open question to all three of you, really.
I'm happy to kick off. Look, I may not have done a formal communications qualification, but what I did do was spend a decade in dealing with large-scale infrastructure projects, which were going wrong, and trying to fix them. And look, any environment you're in, you've got messaging and stakeholders, and effectively, you've got to find the right way of communicating to those stakeholders if you want to get your message across and you want to succeed. You want to shift things. You want to change the culture, the direction. So you suddenly realize in any business environment as well, just how important effective communications, internal, external, and strategic planning around communication is. So yes, you know, if you can, do the qualifications, but also do take on board that any environment you're in has a requirement of comms. You may not be actively acknowledging it. They may not be actively acknowledging it, but it's there, and you can leverage and learn from that experience of whatever you're doing and build on that.
Yeah, just to chip in, I think that's absolutely right. And you know, having worked on major infrastructure projects, a major infrastructure project going wrong is just a major infrastructure project. I mean, I think, you know, I think the most valuable stuff I did on HS2 was standing in the village halls in the Chilterns where we were talking about, you know, this is the map, this is where the track's coming through, you know, this is where the tunnel portals are. I don't think there's any, you know, you both get to stand with the kind of environmental experts and the engineers, and you can really understand that yourself. But every meeting you then have, City Hall, in Parliament, you can talk about your anecdote of what you were there, you were looking at that point, and I think, you know, bringing that is very real. I think the other point Kulveer made about the good news as well is there's always going to be an asymmetry to that. People who aren't going to like it know very quickly they aren't going to like it, and they're going to be pretty vocal pretty soon. Don't wait for the people who are going to benefit to kind of to come along and spout out. You know, you really need to kind of get to the people who are going to feel the benefits pretty quickly. And I think helping people to kind of understand where some of those wider benefits might be that aren't immediately tangible versus, you know, losing the end of your garden is absolutely vital. And then just actually on a point that Aisha made, I think part of the point on, and my career has been more public affairs, bits of media, but really the main thing on the engagement side is, if the bad news you're giving is the first conversation you've ever had with that person, then your engagement plan isn't going very well. And, you know, learn from the first bit of bad news to make sure you're kind of keeping those relationships up. There's nothing kind of worse, you know, sometimes it's inevitable, but introducing yourself with bad news is going to kind of set you off in that direction. But also, I think don't be that friend that only calls when it's going wrong as well. You know, I think it's that point about making sure that your day-to-day engagement's really strong, really helps you for these moments when things aren't going well, but also, you know, when you've actually got some good news, that may be a next session, but when you've got some good news and you want people to amplify that too, you know, that ongoing engagement is vital.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the above, everything that you can get, any kind of experience you can get, do it all. You're not going to regret it. I mean, I started off as a journalist, so I had a bit of understanding about good comms versus bad comms, what works, what doesn't, what the public reacts to within the media. And, you know, I interviewed some chief executives of kind of in crisis communications that were very well prepared. They clearly saw this coming, you know, maybe years before. They had really good optics and strategy behind them. And I saw some other organizations just totally flounder and just collapse under the weight of the pressure. I think kind of with my counselor hat on about that kind of with developments, because obviously there's always going to be controversial developments going on, and people NIMBYs, you know, people don't want it, and it's so important that you get ahead of the narrative, that you don't create this vacuum where people can step in. And the worst thing you can do, because there's always going to be, if there's bad news or there's bad, you know, whether it's an infrastructure project, housing, whatever, there's always going to be a no campaign. And that no campaign absolutely thrives off of organizational silence. So if you don't say anything, if your organization is too scared of the risks about saying anything, that's when they thrive and they can take over the conversation. So absolutely do not do that. But just generally, I would just take up all the opportunities, any opportunities. If you currently don't sit within that team and they're separate, you sit in the public affairs team or internal comms and you want to get some experience, I guarantee your corporate communications team or crisis comms team will be more than happy for you to come and help them and to look at the crisis communications plan. Every organization should have one. If you don't, you should write one. But yeah, you can't have enough experience in it. So just take up all the opportunities that are available to you if you want to get in this space.
Cool, thank you. Actually, can any of you think of like a good example of something that's happening at the moment? Trying to avoid Harry and Meghan and the palace response, but something that's in the news where you admire what an organisation's done, how they've responded to things, and how that might, you know, inspire you to do things differently next time. And it's a difficult one, and we haven't spoken about it. But Andy, any thoughts from your side? Anything that really stands out at the moment, or even in the past 12 months?
I mean, I think, you know, looking at where companies have really changed their approach over COVID and very quickly learned from previous mistakes, which is really difficult because there hasn't been a situation quite like it. But, you know, actually we'd looked at some work done by like Chipotle, who, when they had a big health scare, how long it took to get people back and feeling comfortable again in their restaurants. And, you know, we've been looking at things like, you know, the fall in rail passengers since after 7/7 or after things like the Potter's Bar crash. And I think, you know, over the past 12 months, I think you've seen where, you know, like the supermarkets was a great example as well. The ones who really responded and changed quickly and did how they did their, you know, pushed out their kind of online grocery shopping quickly. The restaurants who changed quickly, and those who I'm not sure look any different to February 2020. And I think, you know, it's going to be a pretty testing time as furlough ends, and I think that's probably going to be a test of some survival.
What about you, Kulveer? Anything that you've seen maybe from the current administration? Anything that you'd like to point out that they're doing really well or really badly?
Yeah, look, it's been a huge learning curve. Let's talk, you know, for the politicians, all politicians, and you know, we can all find the challenges we all seen where things have been difficult for them. But they did that thing. They fronted up. Okay, they've constantly. Did we think there would be a daily press conference, which then, you know, changed a bit, but to have them being exposed to journalists, to people asking questions, to being tackled on every issue in the moment, in reality, even though they are not always certain on the answer that they're having to give, because let's be honest, the data has changed. They've had to learn a lot during the course of that. I think that's been really challenging. But I wrote a small thing for PR Week, actually, where I said, you know, one of the things I think we've learned in the last year, or rather, both the media, the politicians, and especially industry has learned in the last year, is the value of good communicators. Because I think the biggest challenge every business has had is to keep its people informed about what's going on. Because there's been what the government says, Then there's the people who are working in businesses or sending kids to school, and they've got to have those government messages filtered through another format, whether it be the local council or whether it be the business they're in, to then help them understand, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my day-to-day life, for my job, for my family? And the businesses have had to really step up and understand that. And I took the leadership on that in our business in the UK. And what I said to actually our communications team was, this was our moment, not on a crisis sense. This was going to be a new BAU. And I said this to them sort of March last year, and they all kind of looked at me a bit bemused. And I said, don't worry, this is going to be a new BAU, but we're going to learn a hell of a lot, and you're going to find a rhythm of doing this. And that's what we've been doing. Change the rhythm of communication, change the rhythm of what we thought communication was before. Look out for policy changes, look out at what HR needs to do, look at what the functions of the business are, interpret it, and provide, I think Aisha said earlier, a regular rhythm of clear messaging that takes people with us, even when there's not something much to say, but reassure people and engage them and keep those feedback loops coming in. And I think that we know worked well because we kept a pulse of people's views every couple of weeks. How were they feeling? Did they feel that they could trust what they were hearing? Did they feel supported? Did they need anything else? Keep responding, reacting. And it's a rhythm. In communications, we talk a lot, Adam, don't we, about campaigns. This has been one hell of a campaign of managing people through COVID and making them feel supported, whether that's in a business or whether that's what the government has to do. And I think people have done it generally very well.
Do you think the current administration is doing a good job in terms of its communications, especially around the pandemic?
No, I think there'll always be things we can say they can improve on, but I feel they get their messages across. The challenge they had at the start, as with everyone, was what was the model? And there wasn't a model, right? It was really hard because whether it was a model of how do you handle a pandemic, or whether it was, do we have levels, zones, whatever criteria was being established seemed to not apply within a week or two, and people were getting confused about the message. But very quickly, I think, it took a bit of time. They've managed to understand that. But the real issue here is handling the actual virus, because no one knew which direction the virus was going to go in. And when you have confusion from, let's be honest, the scientists and, I don't know how many people there are in SAGE, but they all seem to have slightly different views. And then the politicians have to consolidate that and provide, and then a communications person that has to sort of say, what does that mean in a really easy way for people to understand? That's a really difficult task. But I think they have done it well. I do think they've done it well. Now, we can all, argue the toss about the result. But I think if you ask general public, have people heard enough from the government? They'd probably say yes. Have they felt that they understood what the government was asking of them? Probably yes. Do they agree with it is a different thing, right? So have you heard enough? Did you understand it? Have they been effective in their communication? Now, in the early bit, I would say it was hard. It was challenging to understand what they were asking of people. And it could still be as we go. But now we've got this clear plan for coming out of lockdown, right? These dates which seem to be set in stone, milestones. The government's coming under a lot of pressure from its own party and from business to say, change those dates. It's not budging at the moment, even though rates are going to. That's an example of holding firm to plan communication. If they do change, effectively saying why they might change. So I think they're in a much better place, and I think they are doing a reasonably good job at the moment.
Do you want me to come in, Adam?
Yeah, I think Andy looked like he was going to say something, or was it just one of those Andy stares?
Well, Aisha, you go first.
Just my two, I've got two examples, one bad, one good. So I think I'll start with the bad first, and it might be because I am 7 months pregnant, so I've been watching this, but the way that NHS trusts, maternity trusts dealt with not letting spouses into the delivery rooms, not letting spouses into scans, they took about 6 months of really, really bad press, really bad social media, huge campaign, MPs irate about it, government calling them out. I don't know what took them so long to change their policy, but I think prior to this, they had a pretty good public view, public rating after. I saw a poll recently that their public trust has gone down, particularly in kind of women of childbearing age. You had a great kind of
media story there of a whole bunch of women who were pregnant and or little babies saying, I had to give birth alone. It was just horrific, and it's a horrible story. And I think for, you know, for the general public, it was like, of course they wanted to read more about this. And you know, I think there's a lot of sympathy out there for, you know, mothers and newborn babies. So I think that is an example of bad comms and not getting on the story and just staying silent, really not even explaining the reasons behind why your certain policy is the way it is, and actually changing it in the middle of probably the more, you know, the increased risks. So they actually changed policy towards the end of November, whereas in the summer that, you know, that policy stayed the same. So it really didn't make sense. And I think they're going to be, I think their reputation is going to be suffering for a couple of years to come because of that bad communications. On the good front, I would say the private house builders on the building safety cladding issue, a few of them came out before the government announcement on the new funding scheme and said they agree with the funding scheme. They're going to put their own money in. I think it was Barrett said they were going to put over 160 million pounds into remediation works, and that they supported the developer levy. So they came out ahead of the government announcement and said, we agree with this. And I think that made their shareholders happy. There were some conversations going on behind the scenes that maybe they would be denied some housing help to buy funds if they didn't come out, and they just got ahead of it. And I think the ones that got ahead of the story and said they agree with this, they got public support, they got government backing, and they have happy shareholders. So what more can you want?
Just on what Kulveer had said, I mean, I think the problem is lockdown is a very easy message, and it's pretty well, it's an extraordinary kind of use of government power to be able to just sort of do that in one go. People kind of understood it. I think we saw from tiers that was definitely more confusing and different restrictions for different people. I think reopening is going to be really tricky for all of us, and you know, we're looking now, your first train journey is going to set how you feel about going on your next one. Bad experiences are going to live with people for, you know, in different ways, and people are going to react more. There's personal responsibility, and you know, how you feel about some of these things is going to have more of an impact, and that's a much harder comms sell. So I don't think it can't be left to government really to do that. It's going to be up to everyone to make sure, you know, as we get lives back on track, that people kind of feel willing and able to do it.
Very on message.
I would say that's a great line, Andy. Get your life back on track. Network Rail.
Don't worry, I didn't just make that up.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I'll see the posters at Euston Station.
It's fully tested.
We're at 5 o'clock. Can quickly go around, last 30 seconds from each of you, just final thoughts and tips for the attendees today. Kulveer.
If you find yourself in an environment that you're continuously on the back foot and dealing with bad news, you need to change that environment. You need to be looking at saying, okay, we've got all these challenges, but where's our inform part of our activity where we're telling people broadly about who we are, what we are? Where's our promote side of the activity, which is what we do, what we want them to really remember, and then have some time for the protect. I call that IPP, inform, promote, protect. It's a methodology I've used quite a lot over the years. It helps change the people's understanding of what it is they're doing right now and what it is they should be doing going forward.
Very slick. Aisha?
I think my biggest advice is whoever your customers are, whether it's B2B, B2C, etc., your customers at the heart, and they are the people that matter the most, so that your communication should be focused on that. I think everybody else, you know, is as important, but they're secondary. And I think if your customers are happy, your politicians, your stakeholders are happy, your shareholders are happy. So my advice is always very, very simple: customer first communications approach.
Andy, final for you.
I think it's about, you know, if you're doing comms which is trying to kind of point things in the other direction or kind of move away, then I don't think it's going to work. I think it's that thing about taking responsibility, kind of being accountable for stuff. I think where you find yourself with senior people who are saying things like, well, we could say this, and you can, well, okay, what's the actual truth? What's really happening here? And, you know, when bad things have happened, it's not a really kind of difficult message. It's you apologize, you make amends, and you fix it. And you know, I don't think in handling any bad news, I don't think there's, you know, a much better model.
With that, thank you all very much. Thanks to our panelists and to all the participants for getting involved today. As I said, we'll be putting this on our YouTube channel, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, so you can have a look at it then. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.